We are live. Excellent. And I'll just wait for people to come in. Good afternoon, everybody. I guess it's evening now.
Depends where you are.
Fair. Definitely.
I'm in Valencia, Spain, so it's very much evening.
Very much. All right. Yes. Hi. Good evening, everybody. You are in the right spot. We'll get going in just a moment and let everybody filter in to the room. Awesome. All right, we can begin. Hello and welcome everybody to PNP Live. My name is Beth Wong. I'm on the events team at Politics and Prose, and we thank you so much for joining us here tonight to celebrate the release of The Barcelona Complex, a new book by Simon Kuper. At any time during the event tonight, you can click on the link in our chat to purchase copies of tonight's book from PNP. In addition to growing your own library, a book sale from Politics and Prose means that we are able to keep bringing content like this to our community. You can ask our author a question this evening by submitting it to the Q&A box, the button for which can be found near the bottom of your screen. Be sure to submit it there in the Q&A and not in the chat to make sure our author sees it. Tonight, we are offering live auto captioning. To turn that on or off, go to the little arrow on the CC button below, or if you're on a mobile device, go to the settings of your mobile app. I will waste no more time getting to the main event. This evening, we bring you a conversation about the Barcelona Complex. With rare and unrivaled access, best-selling author of Soccernomics and longtime Financial Times journalist Simon Kuper tells the story of how FC Barcelona became the most successful club in the world and how that era is ending. Kuper will be in conversation with Frank Foer, a staff writer at The Atlantic and author of World Without Mind and How Soccer Explains the World, an unlikely theory of globalization. I'm sure recent news out of Messi's camp will give them plenty to talk about and more. Welcome to you both. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And it's really such a pleasure to be here with you, Simon. I've read, I think, everything that you've written, and you've inspired me as a writer at various moments. And first of all, what are you doing in Valencia? Because will Financial Times readers get tomorrow's headline today by?
I'm officially on holiday. I thought I was going to do gentle book promotion because of Messi. It's been quite heavy book promotion. On holiday in Spain prior to moving to Madrid. So we're all, me and my family, trying to learn some more Spanish hurriedly before we arrive in Madrid later this month.
So I wanted to just start by asking you, I mean, there's so many of, just if I look at your books, like so many of them, I can see the obvious autobiographical reasons you have for writing them. You know, when you wrote Soccer Against the Enemy, you were kind of a young reporter, kind of embarking on this kind of grand adventure. You've written about Ajax, which is not surprising because you have Dutch roots yourself, and you wrote about the war, given that you're Jewish. I had the sense that this book about Barcelona was something that was almost fated for you to write, but kind of why, just as a writer, talk about the choice to kind of make Barcelona kind of this massive subject for yourself, and talk about, given how much ink has been spilled about this club, how you intended to approach it differently.
I think a couple of things came together. One is I'm not Dutch, but I grew up in the Netherlands, and I grew up there in the 70s and 80s when it was kind of the most inventive football country on earth. And my childhood hero was Johan Cruyff. And Johan Cruyff was a great Dutch footballer turned great coach and great thinker on football also, who played for and then coached Barcelona. And he kind of created the modern Barcelona, the way they play. But more than that, I've always seen Cruyff as the man who invented modern soccer. He invented the dominant style of 2021, but he invented it in the 1960s with the Ajax coach of the day in Amsterdam East on this kind of semi-professional field, on the cold edge of town. They invented this: we play on the other team's half, we overlap, we interpass, when we lose the ball, we press to win it back within 5 seconds, we always attack. And to the game of Bayern Munich or Liverpool or Italy winning the Euro, that's Cruyffian soccer. So this guy was impossible. I mean, I met him and fell out with him. He was a genius. He was completely original. And when people talk about Pep Guardiola as the kind of most dominant modern coach, I want to say, yes, but Pep is Cruyff's son. Cruyff invented the whole thing. Pep just gave it rigor, gave it organization. So there was Cruyff. And then the other thing is I've been visiting Barca for 30 years. And I realized when I was there in 2019, writing for the Financial Times, an article, that they regarded me as a sort of alum, as a club member, and they were willing to open every door for me. So I interviewed at the time the head coach at the closed training ground. I interviewed the president. Everyone was just really helpful. And this is very rare in soccer. Unlike in American sports, access is very hard to get, usually kept at a distance as a journalist. So I wrote that article, and then I thought, hang on, this is the biggest club in the world, and they're giving me this access. I should really do something with it. And Frank and I were talking in the green room about journalism and access, the dangers of access. And I wrote to my contacts at Barca, and I said, look, if I were to write a book, would you keep opening doors? And they said, yeah, sure. And to Barca's immense credit, they've never once tried to censor or pre-read or have any say in what I wrote. They just produced dozens of people inside the club for me to interview over the year and a half that I was stalking them. So access plus Cruyff.
What does it say about Barca as an institution? I mean, do you think, was it sui generis that they let you in? Was it just that you happened to be the right guy at the right time, or is there something about the institution that permitted you to enter in the way that you did?
I mean, partly I think we British journalists from ancient titles like Financial Times, we often benefit from snobbery. So people don't read the Financial Times always, but they have this idea that it stands for some kind of British gentlemanly past quality. So I think that helped. And then immodestly, they have this annual sports writing and a grown-up writing prize that they give out every year, which is very typical Barca, their kind of cultural institution. One year, God knows how, I won it. I don't know how these things are awarded. But when I was there in 2019, they were awarding the same prize to this Italian woman, Emanuela Odisio. And they kept saying to me, you must be at the lunch. We're having a lunch for Emanuela and you have to be there. And so I ended up at this lunch, sitting there drinking wine for 4 hours with the president, a few other people, Emanuela, other past winners. And that's when I realized I am an alum. I am not a journalist. They don't see me as a journalist on the outside. They see me as a club member from afar.
Yeah, I found I have a letter from Laporta on my wall from the last time that he was president. And I'd written something really gushing about Barcelona in like 2005 or something, 2006. And the fact that a journalist wrote something kind of lovely about them really touched them. Like I felt like, so I mean, one of the things about Barca is that there's this kind of romance that enshrouds it. Like they have a very strong institution with a very strong sense of self mythology. Yeah. Like how much of that romance do you buy into, and how much do you find attractive yourself? How much of it do you find just to be kind of in the realm of just another institution creating another self-serving narrative about itself?
I mean, I think they do genuinely believe a lot of this stuff about themselves being God's gift, that they had this tradition of beautiful football, totally true, not true anymore, that they had UNICEF on their shirts, but they don't anymore, that they represent the Catalan nation in some kind of battle against General Franco, which some people don't quite clock in Barcelona, that Spain is no longer a dictatorship, that when you are heroically protesting against Real Madrid, you are not doing it in the same context as anti-Franco protests, which almost never happened anyway. So I think there's a lot of myth and romance in it. I also have very mixed feelings about Catalan nationalism. I'm not a huge fan of nationalism in any sense, and Barca is the vehicle of that. But I do love the club? I love many things about the club. I really like the people. I like the city. I like the place. I like the feeling of being in Barcelona. And of course, as anyone who loves soccer in the 21st century must feel, I feel a lot of, they've enriched my life. They've made my life better than it would otherwise be, especially Cruyff and Messi. One reason I wanted to write about these guys is my life would just be less good of a life. And I think that's true of most of us on this Zoom conversation without some of these people.
I just talk about this tension. Like so I'm more sympathetic to Catalan nationalism. Not that it's one of those things where I feel like I don't want independence to happen, but I like the fact that Catalan nationalism exists because there's this kind of fierce drive to preserve culture, history, kind of a sense of peoplehood. But it feels to me like one of the things that's very singular about Barca as a club is that there is this tension that exists in the very fiber of Barcelona. You read about this in the book, between its kind of cosmopolitanism and its localism. Like, is there some extent to which that kind of that tension is part of the reason for its success?
I think Barcelona, the city, sees itself as a cosmopolitan, outward-looking city, and it contrasts itself in that way with the rest of Spain. And it's true that nowhere else in Spain will you find so many people who speak wonderful English, or often French, or the elite has been to, many of them have gone to German schools. And so it's the most cosmopolitan city in Spain. And in fact, in some ways, it's easier to be accepted speaking English there than Spanish. In some situations, it's totally fine to speak English, like in town hall, but not Spanish. So it's cosmopolitan, and it's elite, it's Catalan-speaking elite, upper middle class, is less comfortable being part of Spain. So cosmopolitan is part of the nature. It was founded by a Swiss, by Gamper, who then Catalanized himself, just as Cruyff became a local, although like Messi, they both became locals, but they never learned Catalan. And the three traditions that inform the playing. I mean, somebody put this to me very well. He said, our three traditions from which we draw are Messi, the foreign, Xavi, the Catalan, and Iniesta, the Spanish. Iniesta is from Albacete, I think, which is about 500 kilometers away from Barcelona. So put those three things together and you have the playing staff, but the socis, the members, tend much more to the Catalan. They're Catalan speakers. I mean, of course, many people in Barcelona, Sergio Busquets' family as an example, are Spanish speaking at home. But the members, it's much more this kind of Catalan identifying upper middle class.
Yeah, talk about the class identity of the club, because I think it's really, I mean, so many clubs. I mean, this is a tension within various, like when you have cities that have multiple clubs, usually that there's some kind of class dynamic where you have like a club that identifies as the populist working class club and another that defines itself as more elite. Barcelona, of course, has multiple clubs within the city, but there's really only one club, and so much of its identity is bourgeois. Like, you go to the game, like you can smell the cigar smoke. Like you see like people in suits and ties who are not just the ones sitting in the tribune of honor, like kind of dispersed throughout. That it's kind of a club controlled by various members of the city's elite. Yeah. Like, how does that class identity how is that shaped? Has it shaped the style of play at all? Has that shaped what does that do to the institution?
I mean, I think it lends enormous continuity, because the people who run the club are the local upper middle class, and often the sons, sometimes daughters, of people who ran the club before. So you know each other. People on the board have been to school together, have played amateur football together, go on holiday together, or meet each other on holiday in Sardinia. They meet at the opera where they have season tickets. They meet at the Real Tennis Club. It's a very kind of small group of people who can get to be president. So it's very, what's the word they use? Endogamic. It's very endogenous, almost incestuous. So they fight with each other, they love each other, they knew each other's parents. And so there are all sorts of rivalries that play themselves out. So when Bartomeu has a go at Laporta at Bartomeu, these are not people who just met yesterday. And I think one thing it shaped is the Masia, this very famous academy. I think the Masia is partly sort of like a Catholic family, and partly it's an institution of bourgeoisification. So they take these boys who are often from more working class or foreign background.
Masia is not just, it means the farmhouse, right?
It means literally the farmhouse.
Take a picture of this place and then describe the culture of it, because
well, the Masia is very important to understanding Barcelona. So started in this farmhouse, I think 18th century brick farmhouse, which still stands beside the stadium. And in 1979, they said, okay, we're going to house boys, talented players here. It's become a kind of academy. And so they start bringing in kids from the region and beyond. So Iniesta, Puyol, Messi, Xavi, almost everyone you've heard of, every great Barcelona player lived in the Masia as a teenager. And they have this incredible generation of Messi plus 7 guys who win the World Cup with Spain in 2010 come through the Masia. So this is the best generation that any youth academy in history has produced. But it's not just about football quality, and it's all about you learn how to pass. That's really the only thing they do in the Masia is pass. That's the only thing that football was about, according to Cruyff. But it's also very kind of bourgeois in its norms. So you have to eat with a knife and fork, and you can't take too much milk in your cereal. You have to, table manners is very important. Every kid has to go to school. Half the kids in the Masia end up going to university. So Guardiola went to university, Iniesta went to university. So they take Guardiola and Iniesta, both sons of bricklayers, working class boys, and they get this education because the club run by these bourgeois people thinks, well, part of our mission is to turn these working class boys into bourgeois. And if you see Guardiola now, of course, he's a bourgeois, and his friends are filmmakers and novelists. And that is partly what the Masia made of him.
The other thing that's really interesting about Barcelona is that we of course think about the football team, but it also has a water polo team and a basketball team, many of which have been quite successful on a European stage. And there's kind of part of kind of the openness of Barcelona is that you do have this interaction cross sports. Like, talk about that and how that influenced somebody like Pep.
Yeah, so I used to think, it's a football club with a couple of other sports attached. It's not. It's a multi-sports club. And when you're inside, when they were all based at the Camp Nou, the stadium, they would run into each other in the corridors, and then this meeting place, and I guess every great institution has a meeting place. And at Barcelona, it's the Ice Rink Cafe. Next time you go to the Camp Nou, find the ice rink, which is more or less opposite the stadium, and go in there. And there's this kind of dark cafe with, you get coffee for $2 and wooden tables. And that's where the staff members sit around. It's where the handball players would meet the football players and the basketball players and the coaches. So Johan Cruyff and Guardiola were both, they completely knew the other sports. They knew the coaches, they talked to them. And so things like, in soccer, you now have blocking on corners. So when a corner comes in, you have a couple of guys whose job it is to head it. And then you have a couple of other guys whose job it is to kind of block, like in American football or in basketball, to block, to create space for Piqué, like he did on Sunday, coming in with a header. The reason Piqué can head that ball in is because 2 little guys are pushing the opponent. And that they took from basketball, from handball, from indoor football, where blocking had always been. So, Cruyff and Guardiola both see also all sports really just as sort of brothers or sisters of each other. So you can't understand football just by understanding football. So Guardiola has this great insight into sport. He says in every ball game, you attack down one flank and then you score on the other. And I'm at a tennis camp here in Barcelona, in Valencia now. And it's true. You attack down one side, you score on the other. Same in basketball, same in anything.
All right. Well, let's pivot. Let's talk about Messi. And would Messi have been an all-time great if he had gone to Real Madrid, or if he'd gone to, I guess there was like talk, I'm also an Arsenal fan, God help me. Like if he'd gone to Arsenal, like, which is one of the, there's always like these counterfactual myths at various clubs about how they could have had Messi. But was there something about Barca that made Messi great, or is it just?
I think it really mattered that he went to Barca, because here you have a player who's in the tradition of great Latin American individualists. So when you see him, you see Maradona, you see Garrincha, you see the guy who can dribble past half a team and score. But what Messi, when he came in at 13, until he was about 20, they kept saying to him, but Leo, you have to pass. Football is also passing. And he wouldn't say anything, but he just wouldn't pass. He thought this was nonsense. Why should he pass? He could beat everyone by himself. And so he could have been that kind of player, the individualist only. And those tend not to fare very well in modern European soccer. But at the Masia, every day passing training, every day you play 5 against 2, 4 against 3 in a little square or circle. It's about understanding space, understanding which pass to give. And when he's 21, he's already been in the first team a couple of years. You have guys around you like Xavi and Ronaldinho and Samuel Eto'o saying, Leo, you have to give me the ball. I'll give it back to you, but you have to give it to me. And that's where Messi shows, you know what, I know how to pass. I learned it in the Masia. And so he's now the best collective player and the best individualist player. And that's what makes Messi this kind of perfect combo. So he was paying attention when they taught him passing.
Talk about everybody knows his physical gifts, but talk about his temperament, and if you were to try to explain kind of his character, like what, and you wanted to unlock that for somebody, like is there a fact about him, is there a quality that he possesses kind of psychologically or just temperamentally that kind of helps account for his greatness?
I mean, in terms of who he is and how that plays into his soccer, he's not particularly shy, but he's an introvert. He's never sought to reach out particularly beyond the small family circle. So he has this kind of clan. His parents live there most of the time. He lives in this very quiet house on a hill, sort of like a Californian millionaire suburban house, not a billionaire house, but a millionaire's house on a hill, not far from the sea, where he lives with his wife and 3 kids. He has this very quiet life. He kind of commutes to Barcelona, scores 3 goals, commutes back on the empty highway. And in terms of his temperament, he doesn't really have outside interests particularly. He doesn't live in an entourage. He's not interested in bright lights, big city, which is always a temptation in Barcelona. He doesn't like to talk, and he doesn't care about projecting his personality to people like you or me or the rest of the world. He's never been interested in that. But he does know how he wants Barcelona to play football. And although he doesn't say it in words very much, more and more as he's got older, he speaks, but he lets it be known. One example I like to give is 11 years ago, Barca had signed Zlatan Ibrahimovic, great Swedish centre forward. They paid an enormous amount of money for him. They put him at centre forward. The first 6 games, he scores a goal a game. So great, right? You bought one of the world's top 10 players scoring. Guardiola notices on the bus after a game that Messi is sulking. Messi, of course, doesn't say anything, but he's sort of sulking. So Guardiola says, Messi, what's up? And Messi sort of doesn't quite say it outright, but his message is, I come in from the right, I dribble into the middle. When I dribble into the middle, I don't want a massive Swede shouting at me to give me the ball, which is Zlatan's role. He kind of stands up,
Yeah.
And so that's it. That's the end of Zlatan. Guardiola benches him. Within a year, he's gone. Zlatan very unhappy, but that's what happens because Messi decides, lets it be known without many words what he wants. Why is Tito Villanova appointed as head coach, or Tata Martino, guys with no particular status in football? Messi liked them. So you have to, inside Barcelona, they were constantly trying to work out what this little guy wants. He wants something because he wants to win. The other thing that's important, I think, he wants to win, he wants to have his say because he feels under immense pressure. The number one, as Cruyff said, carries the most pressure because if you're the right back or if you're just a guy in the team, you're responsible for your performance. But Messi is responsible for the results. It doesn't, when you're winning 4-0 against Elche, it doesn't matter. You don't need Messi particularly. But in any type game, when things are not going well, Messi is the guy who has to win it. So that's enormous pressure and stress. And that's why he will vomit before the game in the changing rooms. He lives with this pressure, which is almost inhuman. In fact, being the best player only increases the pressure. And so he has a lot of anxiety. He knows he'll play well, but that's not enough.
What about there's this, Barcelona nurtures his genius. The way that the coaching carousel at Barcelona turns means that kind of at the moment that he's like spent like a year or two, is it in the first team, maybe it's a little bit longer, Pep Guardiola arrives as the manager. What was it about their relationship that caused this kind of this sublime, whatever it is, multi-year, 3-year period where Barcelona plays just, the all-time great football?
All right, so Guardiola becomes coach in 2008, when Messi has just turned 21 and he's just maturing into a great player. But, I've never believed, and I wrote in my book, Soccernomics, that coaches are that important, although I think Guardiola is a good one. But Messi really doesn't care much about coaches. So Messi doesn't think, oh, great, Guardiola's coach now, we can all get it sorted out. Messi thinks most coaches are idiots. They shouldn't say too much. Footballers know how to play football. And when I interviewed Ernesto Valverde, then the head coach of Barca, a couple of years ago, he said, the best players interpret football better than I can. He said, I can't tell Messi or Busquets how to play football or what to do in a game. They see that better. So Messi doesn't need a coach. What Guardiola was very important for was creating structures like we pass 15 times, short passes, we progress up the field slowly so that when we lose the ball, we're in this narrow band all close together, very hard for the opponent to break through. Or we have the 5-second rule or the 4-second rule. When we lose the ball, we press very hard for 4 seconds to win it back. And Guardiola trains the team in these things. And Messi is part of that. At that age, he's still able to do his defensive work. And he's very good at it. He's the best defender in the team. And the other thing that Guardiola does is he spends 2 or 3 days. He's more a video analyst in a way than a coach. So Guardiola locks himself up in his cave. You know, the coach's room in the Camp Nou, where they used to spend most of their time, is this kind of very, unseemly cave with no windows. He laid a carpet and put in a lamp to make it a bit more livable. And he'd sit in the cave and watch video of the next opponent for 2 or 3 days. And then he'd spot the flaw. So for example, Real Madrid, one obvious flaw was always Cristiano Ronaldo doesn't defend. So when you attack against Real Madrid, you attack down Ronaldo's side because they're a man short there. Anyone can see that. More advanced is 2009 against Real Madrid. Guardiola spots that there's a gap between Real Madrid's central defenders and their midfielders. And he says to Messi, you go into that gap. That's where you have to go. So Guardiola could spot the opposition. He introduced rigor and rules to Cruyffian intuition. But Messi didn't need any of that. The other players did.
So at this stage in our conversation, we need to turn to kind of the decline of Barcelona. And is it fair to ask what happened, or is it something that's just inevitable given the cycles of history? I mean, it strikes me that a lot of Barcelona's strengths as an institution ended up becoming kind of fatal weaknesses in the institution, just given the way that the presidential structure and the kind of the democracy of the club allowed for certain habits to flourish. What went wrong?
Yeah, it's a bit like the decline and fall of Rome. I mean, one thing that began to play in my head when I was writing was that old Avis slogan, rental car firm, we're number 2, we try harder. And there's a great truth in that. It's true in business, it's true in sport. When you're number 1, you stop thinking. And Barcelona were number 1, as you said, for about 10 years. And in the end, it just becomes, we got Messi, we had Neymar and Xavi and Iniesta. You just give them the ball, they'll sort it out. Messi always solves every problem. Anything that's not going so well, Messi will win the game for you. And so you get lazy. And other clubs come and watch Barcelona. They copy the style, they copy the academy. Barcelona guys never, I say guys because almost all the officials on the men's football team are men. They never went to look abroad. They never went to see what Bayern Munich were doing or anything like that. So they got lazy. And then the money keeps flowing in. So in 2018, they become the first sports club in any sport, in the history of sports, to gross more than $1 billion in revenues. And so all this money's coming in, so of course you spend it, and you spend it slightly lazily, because why not? So in 5 years, they spent over $1 billion on transfers, more than any other club, on buying players, more than any other club in soccer in that time. And they also pay Messi something like $700 million in his last 4 seasons, which is about 3 times as much as any other player in soccer is earning. So they developed this, the Messi strategy became Messi dependencia, as they call it. And so you just depend on Messi. And if he wants something, you give it to him. If his dad asks for more money, which he did all the time, you give them more money. You just think Messi will solve our problems.
One of the things about the history of Barcelona is that their dominance was so complete for this intense period of time that it's hard to think back to the beginning of the 21st century when they were a good team but not a dominant team, or to go back, a decade before that when they hadn't won the Champions League ever. And there was some it's a club that's kind of perpetually it's a club that's perpetually troubled, right? That in its long history, you can see that it hasn't always been successful. As it goes through this kind of reckoning now, what's gonna happen? Are they gonna have to make some sort of fundamental change to the structure or the culture of the institution? And of course, like now they're up against nation states in terms of competing for budgets and the like. You can even pose the question in a way that kind of feels familiar. Like, if those nation states are the autocrats of the world, can Barcelona's democracy and that model of governance actually compete with the autocratic nation states?
I mean, as in normal politics, the autocrats have huge weaknesses themselves and often run their clubs very badly too. Their advantage is that they have oil money typically to pump into clubs, and UEFA's rules, the European Soccer Association, has tried to make it very hard to put in outside money. But Paris Saint-Germain has done that quite successfully post-pandemic. Those rules have been relaxed. And so Paris Saint-Germain are going to make something like $300 million losses this year. And the European Soccer Authority has said to them, okay, that's fine, post-pandemic, we're relaxing the rules a bit. And that allows them to have Messi, Neymar, and Kylian Mbappe in one attack. And where does that money come from? It comes from Qatar. It comes out of the earth. And the Qataris don't care about losing $300 million. It's nothing. It's like buying a cup of coffee to them. So that is an advantage, not so much the structure of control and command as just the money that the autocrats have. Does Barcelona's democratic model go? No, I mean, it's what Barcelona is. A soccer club isn't about winning or losing. You can survive forever. And clubs that don't win, I mean, I think of Newcastle or Sunderland, clubs that never win the league, are very popular, have huge numbers of fans, because for the fans, it's not particularly about winning. And Barcelona was a huge club, as you say, until May 1992, they'd never won the Champions League. They'd gone long periods without winning the Spanish league. They don't have to win to be huge. Their identity is very strongly as this Catalan democratic members club. And that's the last thing that will go. They would much rather hang on to that than hang on to greatness and victory. The greatness and victory is going to go for the while. They're not going to win the big things for the next few years.
What about talk about the Dutch DNA and the Cruyff style and this tradition that became synonymous with Barcelona? Like, as you say, it's kind of been universalized, and so it exists now to some degree all over the world. But is there still something there that feels particular to Barca, or is that gone forever?
Yeah, this Dutch DNA is very strong. I mean, growing up in Holland, I always saw Barcelona as a Dutch club. And when I met both Bartomeu and Laporta, president and ex-president, separately, we both had this conversation where I said, yeah, I grew up in Holland, so I grew up with Dutch football, so I grew up with Cruyff. And they said, yeah, me too. Because of course, if you were of a certain age growing up in Barcelona, you grew up with exactly that Cruyffian Dutch tradition. So yeah, they have that DNA, and they always often appoint a Dutch coach, like now Ronald Koeman is coach. But as you say, I mean, this is when the good idea becomes mainstream, it ceases to give you a competitive advantage. The best ideas get stolen, and that's what's happened to Cruyffian football. I mean, when even Italy have mastered it,
yeah,
you know, what's Barcelona's advantage? When even England is producing little ball-playing, passing guys like Phil Foden or Jadon Sancho, you know, what is Barcelona doing that even England can't do?
Right. Is it like, from where you sit, is this like a spectacular development, or does it make you sad to see something that you were so attached to and that felt kind of countercultural become the culture?
I feel vindicated. You know, I always thought Cruyff was the greatest man. I mean, I fought with him, so I have a certain distance from him. I describe that in the book. Unwillingly to me, we had a conflict. I see him as the greatest man in the history of football. I see him as the Freud or the Einstein or the Marx or the Moses of football. And a bit of a lunatic, obviously, but he is just the most interesting guy. And it does me good that Liverpool or Bayern Munich or Liverpool or Bayern Munich or Italy are now Cruyffian football teams.
So what did you, like, as you studied Cruyff, like, what did you, and as you've like marinated in the game for so many decades, what have you learned about the Visionaries? Like, what was it, like, you know, who like, is there a pattern that we can see that helps somebody like that gives somebody like a Cruyff an advantage? Like the people who can see the game in its next iteration so clearly, where do they come from? Like, what is it about them temperamentally or biographically?
I mean, probably like all visionaries, and I can't think of, there are other visionaries in football, but Cruyff looms over them. Probably like all visionaries, his instinctive take on the world was everything you're doing is wrong, listen to me. And he'd walk into a room, as a 15-year-old or as a 40-year-old, he'd see street makers, what would you call it, workmen trying to fix a street. And he'd stop and he'd say, no, you're doing it wrong. You want to do it like this. There's a famous story of Cruyff when he was playing for the Washington Diplomats, arriving for a training camp in Florida. He'd never been to Florida. And the bus gets lost. And Cruyff walks up to behind the bus driver and says, okay, turn left here, go here, directs the bus driver successfully. So you have to have this enormous self-confidence. You have to believe that you are always right. And you also have to have this special spatial vision in football. You have to have this kind of Escherian vision that this, you have to see space in a way that other people don't. And Messi can see space in a way that other people don't. But Cruyff could also describe it. That was unique. And then you have less original people. I mean, sorry, just very briefly, just think of Gerd Müller, who died this week, the German striker. Gerd Müller saw football, and he had a completely brilliant footballer's mind, but he couldn't explain it, except to his friend Beckenbauer. So Beckenbauer was a very articulate guy, was the captain. And when West Germany lost in the World Cup 74, Beckenbauer sits next to Müller on the plane and says, Gerd, in their Bavarian dialect from childhood, Gerd, what went wrong? And Müller explains to him, he wasn't right. And then Beckenbauer, because he's the leader, he rejigs the team. But Müller could see it.
Right. I mean, when we talk about, when you talk about Pep versus Cruyff, I mean, Pep, I think, as you said, I think correctly, and I agree with you, is not a visionary. You described him as a video technician. Video analyst. I totally buy that. But the other thing that I think, I mean, the question of like why Pep succeeded where Cruyff only kind of half succeeded, or Cruyff undermined himself, or however you want to describe it, is kind of Pep also. He's like a motivational speaker. He's like as a man manager. There's something about him like that. Like his charisma is so intense and focused.
Well, Cruyff was charismatic too. I would say that Guardiola has the advantage over Cruyff of not being a lunatic, of being able to understand other minds. I mean, Cruyff himself said that the two players he'd worked with, the only two players he said you could talk to about other people's problems were Guardiola and Dennis Bergkamp, because he said they had a kind of maturity and distance. So Guardiola is a grown-up. He's educated, unlike Cruyff, so he can speak and explain in a much better than Cruyff can. He does his homework. Cruyff would never watch the opposition. He can think of a rule, like the 5-second rule. He can plan it out. He can explain it. All these things Cruyff would never do.
Right. Because Guardiola, if you transposed him to a law firm or like a corporation, he'd be the
CEO.
Yeah.
He would become the CEO very quickly. Yeah. And Cruyff would be kicked out.
Yeah.
He would be day two. He'd be saying to the CEO, no, it's completely wrong.
So like so to go back to Barcelona, if you were president of Barcelona, which,
and it may yet happen.
It may yet happen. I'd vote for you. What would you do? Like, what would be the first steps you would take to arresting this decline? Is there like a manager that you would appoint? Is there something you would do to kind of revamp La Masia? What would you do to change course?
I would go to the best people in the world outside Barcelona. I would say we've been too endogamic, too incestuous. Who are the best people in the world who understand football? And I don't care, very unusually, I would have this huge advantage in football, and I would say, I don't care if they're a woman or a man. I don't care what their skin color is. And that would allow us to get a much broader talent base than all the other clubs who are still very largely recruiting just white men, often ex-players. I'd say, bring me the most intelligent people in the world, tell them they can work for Barcelona and live in Barcelona, and say, look, we all know our principles, it's Cruyffian football, but tell us how to do that in 2021, because you can't go back to 2009. That doesn't exist anymore.
you wrote in the Financial Times a terrific piece about PSG. I think it was last year on the eve of the Champions League finals, and just you helped me understand a lot about the club, and kind of made me, I think a lot of people from the outside tend to kind of despise it because of its ownership, because it's got this galacticos approach to the way that it's gone about assembling to buying, to try to buy championships, and everybody takes kind of delight in the fact that, like, they're the club that's devoted to one thing, and they seem to kind of perpetually come just short of achieving that one thing. Like talk about the, like, you know Messi's going from Barcelona to this totally different place. Like, give people a little bit of more of a sympathetic insight into this other place where Messi's going.
Yeah, well, I've just come off 20 years of living in Paris, and I have two sons who are PSG fans in body and soul. And I'm going to go back to Paris next summer. And PSG is a real club. I mean, it is Qatari owned. It is full of galacticos. They are trying to buy success, but there are 12.5 million people in the Paris region, and there are millions of people who really love PSG and have loved PSG since the club was founded in 1970. I know that's short by the standards of other football clubs, but it's a long time in the Paris region where, Paris is a city of 2.5 million, the beautiful Paris that we all know. Outside, that's 10 million people. It's like Manhattan versus the rest of New York. Outside Paris, there are 10 million people living in the suburbs of Paris. And that's where PSG is biggest. These are often low middle class, working class people of all ethnicities. Paris is a rare football club, and you see people of all colors sitting in the stands, and they love their club. I mean, the fandom, the passion there is as big as it is in Barcelona, probably bigger, because Barcelona is very much a kind of opera-going crowd, or as big as it is at Arsenal. I get very irritated by descriptions of Paris as if it had been kind of invented 3 years ago by Disney.
Right. It's a much more authentic working class institution. It's like, as you say, it's a more working class institution, or more working class club than Barcelona.
Yeah, and then on top of that, you have this layer of the Parisian elite, which of course has discovered it or rediscovered it in the days of Neymar and Mbappe. But I mean, Nicolas Sarkozy is an example of someone who grew up in the Paris region, the former president, as a PSG fan. And he, in fact, brokered the sale of Paris Saint-Germain to the Qataris. Yeah. And of course, there's all sorts of skullduggery, and it's why Sarkozy helped Qatar get the World Cup on the back of that. But nonetheless, this was a real club, which also had Sarkozy helped get it out of its hooligan phase when going there was really unpleasant and dangerous. There was a lot of racism in the stands between PSG fans, because there were almost no traveling fans in France. Anyway, so it's a very weird club. There's a lot to say about it. It's not just Qatar.
So how did we've done our highbrow soccer thing but so much of the kind of discourse of the game is really ultimately about fans and feelings. So when Messi went to PSG from last week, I can't remember, earlier, what was your, how did you emotionally respond to it? Like, what was your visceral response to it? And I know this is a complicated question as an author, because it's coming on the eve of
yeah, I was going to say, what it's like. I just written a book, and then Messi gives it, it's almost like I called him and said, Leo, we need to buzz around the launch. What can we do? My gut response was brilliant. The whole world's going to be talking about Barcelona. I've just got a book out. I have to say that I've been in football too long, kind of looking behind the curtain. In football, when you to really react like a fan most of the time. In football, when you peek behind the curtain, and I'm sure it happened to you when you wrote How Soccer Explains the World, and it happens to most journalists, most directors, most employees of football clubs. When you see behind the curtain, you see that for players, the club is mostly an employer. There's a lot of irritation, a lot of venality. The kind of dream aspect fades.
I totally agree. I needed to take a couple of years off of. After writing my book, I took like a year or two off of watching, because it does take the joy out of it to intellectualize it, which is why, it's an interesting cautionary tale to people who are kind of fanatics who think that this is like the dream profession. I mean, it is dreamy.
It's great. It's great. Yeah, I'm not complaining.
But there is a cost.
Well, the other thing is that if it's not the dream, you did it for a year or two. I did it at one point for 12 years, 1998, 2010. I was writing about sport most of the time, almost all the time. And then it really gets not a dream. You're surrounded often by stupidity, especially in football. There's so much stupidity. You go to the press conference and the manager is giving all these self-justifying nonsense explanations of why he lost, and the journalists asking stupid questions about, is he having a row with X or with Y? And you feel you're marinating in stupidity. And so in 2010, when the Financial Times gave me a general column, I was delighted to get out of that as a daily thing. So I now only try only to write about sport when I feel I have something to add, something to say.
Let's go through some of these questions that have piled up. The first one is, do you ever see Barca getting out of the financial troubles that they've dug themselves into?
Not for quite a while. Very hard to inject outside money. The debt of 1.4 billion, 1.3 billion euros is going to take a while to clear. So don't hold your breath, I'm afraid. They're
going to have to suffer. Or does it require them to double down on youth? I mean, they have Pedri, they have, like, they do have like a young core that's probably...
Yeah. I mean, they have Pedri. How long will they have Pedri? I mean, if Bayern Munich comes in a year from now and says, look, Barcelona, I notice you have a large debt and there's this young player we like. Pedri's not from the Masia, of course. He grew up on the Canary Islands. They bought him last year. Brilliant purchase, the only good purchase really of the Bartomeu years almost. So, I mean, people say now, oh, they should go back to the Masia. They should draw on the youth academy. That made them the best in the world. It's never going to happen again. You're never going to get a generation like that again from the Masia. And now that everyone's copied the Masia no longer has any kind of
advantage. Somebody asks, do you think? I think I'm reading this right. Do you think should they turn to Holland again? Essentially, I think is the Dutch coaches to help revitalize the Cruyffian tradition.
I mean, why Holland? All the best teams play like that. Why not get an Italian coach? Why not get a German coach? I mean, these ideas have spread around the world. So, Klopp's not a Dutch coach. Guardiola's not a Dutch coach, but they understand it very well. I would recommend the current Ajax manager, Erik ten Hag. I think he would do very well at Barcelona. But football is not a national culture anymore. It's kind of spilled beyond the boundaries. So it's hard now to tell the difference between an English or an Italian or a Spanish or a Dutch team.
Somebody asked about the relationship between Messi and his father, and he asks, has there ever been conflicts between the two of them? I mean, it seems like his father, it's clearly a seminal figure in this transaction and in the management of his son's career. But is it a perfectly placid relationship between the two? Like, describe the paternal.
Well, show me anyone in the world who has a perfectly harmonious relationship with their father. But I would say two things. One is that in a family like that, and it's true in sports everywhere, the sportsman is told, you just play, that's your job. Especially in soccer, where the kid is, from the age of 12, he's being prepared for this life, for becoming the breadwinner. And Messi was the family breadwinner at age 13, when they paid the family a salary to move from Argentina. So they say to the kid, you just play football, we'll take care of the rest. And so Jorge fancies himself as a businessman, the father. And so he did the negotiations, he did the tax evasion that got him and his son convicted. It's not that Messi kind of sits up at night saying, where should we stash our money to keep it free of tax? Or that Leo says, I think we need another salary raise. Do you think you can get one out of Bartomeu? Messi doesn't know about that, doesn't think about that. That's not the division of labor within the family. The other thing I'd say is that when you become famous very young, age 17, And a lot of my book is also about what it's like to be a great footballer, even beyond being a Barcelona, what it's like to be a top-class footballer today, the kind of lives they have. And it's a life of seclusion. You lose contact with the society you grew up in. And Messi didn't even really grow up in a society. From the age of 13, he grows up inside a family and inside a football club. And so your family are really the only people you knew almost before football. And even his wife, Antonella, he met her as a child in Rosario in Argentina. So the only people you really trust are the people you met before you become rich and famous. And those people are your core. And much more than normal people like us, they're reliant on their family, because who else can they trust? You know, you see a version of this with the Trumps, because there is money in the family and has been for, you know, nearly 100 years. They have this defense mechanism against the rest of the world. The rest of the world is trying to get their paws on our money or trying to interfere in our business in some way, so we can only trust each other. So the Messi family, I would never obviously tar them by association with the Trumps, but these kinds of families take on bizarre dynamics and are very us against the world.
If he wasn't the world's greatest player, would he be interesting? Like, you know, Maradona is like you could watch, if Maradona was just like, if you watch the Maradona documentary and he was just like some guy off the streets of Buenos Aires, like you'd still say, oh, he's like, there's something kind of operatic and just like manic and like interesting about this guy, this super intense guy. Or Cruyff, like if he was just like a mediocre footballer, still would have interesting ideas. You could read an interview with him and like walk away and say, like, this is a guy with interesting thoughts. Messi like strikes me as not so much like that.
No, I mean, he would be maybe working in his father's steel factory, the steel factory where his father worked, maybe losing his job as the kind of steel industry collapsed, being one of these Argentinians living on the kind of edge of the former first world. I'd find it very hard, and also living a very unremarkable life, I think still he would have lived a family-oriented life in a small home in Rosario. I find it very hard to see he would have become a world historical figure. But also, I mean, Maradona grew up in Argentina, grew up in a Peronista family, very much absorbing Argentine culture, just as Cruyff grew up in Dutch Calvinist post-war culture. You know, Cruyff grew up on the streets. Messi grew up really inside, as I say, inside a family and inside a youth academy.
Does every age get the kind of the star footballer it deserves? So like Cruyff was a creature of the 1960s, like a free thinker, kind of like not a hippie, but there's like, you could, you know, the counterculture affected him. Maradona was like a creature of the 80s and like the excesses of the me generation and like Coke and like all these things. And then Messi is like the perfect footballer for late capitalism, where it's like all kind of multinational and like in a way characterless.
Yeah, maybe the footballer is perfect product. So football is definitely better now. The game on the field is definitely better than when Maradona and Cruyff played by an enormous margin. I mean, Maradona and Cruyff would have coped. They would have, had they been born in our era, they would have become great as well. But yeah, I mean, football changed when TV money came in the 90s. So suddenly you could earn millions. And before then, being a great footballer was more like being a rock star. So you performed for a few years and you lived this kind of wild life and you were finished by 30. I mean, why not? It was more like personal expression. And then the clubs in the 90s say, look, we're going to pay you a lot of money, a lot of TV money. And in return, you're going to go to bed at 10 o'clock and you're going to eat well. Nobody does cocaine, nobody smokes. And you just listen, you obey. And the players essentially said, okay, which is why they last now until their mid-30s or longer, and why they're better and more tactically disciplined. But it does make them less interesting. I mean, I think there's now a new generation coming up, and you see this especially in England, of the most educated footballers in history. So they have this podium, they're very educated. So the English players are very aware of racial issues, and they can express it very well and interestingly. And also they're economically independent, because after 2 years at the top, you probably have $10 million. So then you have a lot less to worry about. So the footballers have become more powerful because they're so wealthy and they're well represented by their agents. So that gives them power versus the club, and they're more educated. And so now we're seeing the footballer as activist, which you've had in US sports for a long time, but in soccer, we haven't really had that.
All right, a question from David, who asks, would you say your writing style, your process of interviewing and research has changed significantly since you wrote Football Against the Enemy? I would just add to that question, or a little bit of commentary, which is I think that this is like those were wonderful. Football Against Enemy is a wonderfully reported book. It's experiential. In its travelogue. This is like, to me, kind of your best. I mean, I think it's just a tremendous book. It's like the reporting is incredible. Like, you burrowed yourself into the fabric of this institution. It's like, it wasn't, you weren't parachuting into a place. Like, this is deep knowledge built up over a long period of time. And I think that the writing is probably is like clearly evolved, and it's like it's the development of character, and like the way in which you unfurl information is very subtle and happens in a very large canvas. So answer David's question for yourself, but that was just my short way of saying everybody should purchase this book if you haven't already.
I'm grateful for that. Coming from you, it's high praise. I'm reminded of P.G. Woodhouse when somebody criticized the story he wrote when he was 28. He said, it's dash creditable to me that at the age of 28, I could write at all. And I feel that about Football Against Enemy. Look, I was 23, 22 when I started this. I turned 23 in Barcelona, celebrated with falafel at a food stand, because that was the only food I could afford that day. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And I'd arrive in these places, remember there was no internet, and I would just hope to get an interview, or maybe even 4 interviews. And I felt if I got 1 interview a day, that was a success with almost anyone. And I walked into Barcelona in 1992 and asked for an interview with Kev. And they're very nice to me, and they gave me his assistant, Tony Banslot. And that's sort of where this book started with hindsight. But yeah, it was just really hard to get to people. And I'd arrive in countries, with some phone numbers scrawled on a piece of paper, and in a language I didn't speak. So I'd call up and I'd say, is Mr. Sanchez here? And they'd say, no, he died 10 years ago, or he moved away, or we've never heard of him. And, tried doing that in Estonia and then in Argentina. So it was just always impossible to get to people. And with FC Barcelona, here I have the biggest club in the world, setting up often 5 interviews a day for me. I mean, it was easy by comparison. And that's also what age gives you. Age, you lose some of the freshness of seeing things anew, but you gain contacts and experience, and yes, know-how in how to write something.
A different David asks, can you imagine an alternative history where different decisions averted Barcelona's decline? In retrospect, if the club could undo a single major decision transfer, what do you think it would be?
Well, they'd undo the 3 transfers of Griezmann, Dembele, and Coutinho, which cost more than $500 million total and have not really brought them much. So that's one thing they would undo. The second thing is that when Jorge Messi began asking them for more money, Messi's salary trebled between 2014 and 2020. They'd have sat him down and they tried to educate him on the concept of being a stakeholder rather than a vulture capitalist. So I think those are 2 important go back in time things.
Just following up on that, I mean, when you listen to Messi, that press conference he gave, I mean, he does seem to have genuine sadness about the outcome, right? Like he wanted to stay.
Yeah. He's also a dad. I mean, last August, September, when he decided to leave, he told his wife and 3 sons, and they all burst into tears, all 4 of them. And Messi said later it was a drama, and a couple of the sons are very anxious about moving to a new country, a new school, learning a new language. And Messi, I think after that, when the club made him stay last year, Messi thought, you know what, it's such a nightmare to try and move my family. We're happy here. I'm still sort of happy at the club. We've never lived anywhere else. We're not people who want to see the world. Let's just stay. I'll sing out the rest of my career here. It's fine. And so it was an enormous shock for him on August 5th when Barcelona deprived him of that option. So I think his sadness wasn't simply some kind of love of club, which I don't fully believe in. I think it was the terror of being uprooted from a life that he and his family know and love.
When I hear him talk about his family, it's actually it's clearly the most human, but also the most interesting things that he has to say, because there's like real, I mean, there's depth there. It's like he's not faking anything. He's not restraining himself. It's pretty. I find it's like the most compelling interviews I've heard him give, or compelling sections of a press conference, or when he talks about that.
Yeah, I mean, Messi is not very good at faking it. He's not an actor.
No. Well, I think Beth is here.
Yeah, I am so sorry. I've just been listening and I look up and it's 4 o'clock. Yes, I'm so sorry to cut this short. Gentlemen, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you to everybody in the audience who's joined us. Yeah, this was fantastic and engrossing, and thank you so much. Everybody, the link is in the chat to purchase your copy of the Barcelona Complex. And while you're on Politics and Prose's website, be sure to check out our events calendar because we've got a lot of great other events like this coming up soon. So everybody stay well read, and have a lovely evening. Simon, Frank, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. I just wrote, I really enjoyed but I mean, I really enjoyed it. You know what I meant. Thanks very much, Frank.
Absolutely. Bye.
Gentlemen, for doing this. Bye, everyone.